In this three-part leadership series, we're talking about the mind of a champion. The mind of a champion. If you have not listened to the previous two lessons, I encourage you to do so. And this third lesson, I'm calling it the roar of the crowd. The roar of the crowd. Now, here's what I mean by this. Let me ask you a question. Does the home team have an advantage? Well, that depends. If the fans are into the game, yes, they definitely have an advantage because of the enthusiasm of the fans, that they're more than just fans. They have become fanatics. They believe their team is going to win, and they help to encourage the players to play better than they can play. The home team having the advantage. Yogi Berra was known for his wise little quips that he would make, and one of them that he said was, if the fans don't come out to the ballpark, you can't stop them. That was a twist on words that he used there, but we get the gist of what he's saying. If the fans are in the game, if they really believe in their team, then they're able to encourage them. The roar of the crowd. Now, here's what I'm talking about. There are basically two groups of people in every organization. It doesn't matter what organization we're talking about. In every organization, there are these two groups of people. And that is insiders and outsiders. Oh, yes. I am a minister, a teacher, and I have visited some churches for years. For 40 years, I've been going to that church and I speak. I'm always an outsider. I will never be an insider because I don't qualify. I wasn't born in that church, or I didn't marry somebody from that church. And so the insiders and the outsiders, every organization has them. And it's the very nature of the church. The nature of the church is to become insider focused. That happens everywhere. Every leader has got to beware. If he's not careful, his church will develop an insider mindset. That is not the mindset of the champion. When we surround ourselves with people that think like we do, we become convinced that's the best way to think. For instance, you grow up in a family, and because you're growing up in that atmosphere and that environment, you think that's the way life really is. Then you discover that's the way life was right there, but that doesn't mean that's the way life is everywhere. And just because we were doing it that way doesn't mean that's the best way to do things. See, that's the insider mindset that all of us have to deal with. And over a period of time, we learn to ignore the voices of concerned people from the outside. They become more like the enemy to us. And we're not listening to anything that they have to say because they're the outside. They're on the other side. And we view them as the enemy. Now, the danger of that is what it does to us and our effectiveness to become who God called us to be. Let me give you a couple of statistics that concern me a lot. In the United States, statistics say that 80% of all new churches fail in the first year. Why? There's a lot of different reasons why, but one of the main reasons is most new churches are patterned after existing churches. In other words, why are we starting a new church that's just like that church, Why are we going over? We're not thinking the process through many times, and that is one of the main reasons that so many new church plants fail. Here's another statistic that really concerns me. 74% of college students who have grown up in church will drop out of church during college. Now, the good news is many of those return later in life, but the tragedy is, why did they drop out? I think for many of them, we never gave them a good foundation. We never really taught them the things that were important. And so millions of people have come to see the church as irrelevant. What value does it contribute to my life? How is this going to help me be a happy person? How is this going to fulfill my goals and dreams? And yet so many churches go on continuing to do business as usual without listening to the concerns of those. I think those statistics ought to cause us to stop and think, why is it that we're not being effective? Why are we not reaching more people? What is it that is causing us to somehow not have an influence on the people in our community, the people that are around us? The roar of the crowd. What we need to do as leaders, we need to learn how to focus on the people that we're trying to reach rather than who we're trying to keep. Now, by saying who we're trying to keep is the disgruntles, and there's always those, the ones that are unhappy, the ones that are, and if we're not careful, we begin to just cater to these disgruntled insiders rather than trying to reach new people. We must continually be reaching out. It's the reason I do what I do and traveling the world and training leaders is because I'm always looking for new opportunities, new people that I can influence, I can impact for Christ. And I've discovered there are some people that you can't be effective because you can't feed someone that's not hungry. But you find someone that's hungry, you can help that person. And so focus on who you're trying to reach. What is your goal in life rather than who you're trying to keep? Now let me break this lesson into three main parts so you can remember what I'm going to talk about. First of all, let me talk about learn when to ignore the insiders. There's certain times, oh yes, sometimes we need to listen to them because they are insiders and they are our supporters. They are the people that are there. But there's sometimes you need to learn to ignore what they are saying. See, insiders will always let us know what they're thinking because they're always present. It's one of the things I've discovered about the critics. The critics are always going to let you know what they think. You may have spoke to 100 people and 95 of them were very pleased with the sermon. And yet, who is it you're going to hear from? I tell you, you're going to hear from those 5 that were not happy. They will let you know why they did not like the message. That's this insider mentality that I'm talking about. And the problem arises when the insiders become accustomed to the church revolving around them. In other words, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And they learn by complaining, that's how they get attention. It's by complaining, that's how they get what they want. And so when we begin to cater to that, we become an insider-focused church. And that's where we're in trouble. The needs and interests of insiders have a tendency to determine the agenda of any organization. As leaders, we must intentionally make this decision. I'm not going to listen to that because they're just complaining again. When to ignore the voice of the insider. When they're simply complaining. When they're not doing what they need to be accomplishing. I remember speaking to the young lady and I said to her, you have reached the point in your Christian journey where you're never going to be a happy Christian again unless you get involved in ministry in the church. Unless you begin giving and sharing of what you have learned. Because now you know more than your teacher knows. Why aren't you teaching? Why aren't you sharing? And this is what happens with so many with the insider mindset. They only want you to cater to them, to their whims, to their desires. And that creates an insider mentality. This is especially true of churches. I've been in hundreds, thousands of churches. And what I see so many times is it's just a little group of people on their way to heaven. And they're not thinking about anybody outside those walls. Now, I thank God that they're helping the ones that are there, but that is not our purpose. Our purpose is to reach out, to reach new people for Christ. Do not just focus on yourself. Jesus said it this way. This is found in the book of Luke, the 19th chapter, verses 9 and 10. Jesus said to them, "For the Son of Man," he's speaking of himself, "has come to seek and to save that which was lost." Did you see where the emphasis is on Christ's life? He's not thinking about just those that are a part of his discipleship group. No, they're important, but he's come to seek and to save the lost. Those that don't know the good news. Those that have not been evangelized. Those that have not learned the truth. That's where the focus needs to be, on the outsiders. So how are we going to get this input from outsiders? They're on the outside. How are we going to know what they're thinking? Well, we need to learn to ask questions, good questions. Ask them questions and then get quiet and listen. Listen to their answers. Listen to what they're saying. Now, much of what they're saying may be inaccurate. It may be a misconception, a miscommunication, a misunderstanding. But look for the reason behind why they're saying what they're saying and see if there's not an element of truth there. If we hear something repeated again and again and again, usually there's some truth behind that. We need to find out what that is and see what we can do about that. That's how we can learn from the voice of the outsiders. See, it's a mistake for us as leaders to focus on pleasing the insiders, because soon what you have is just a church full of complaining people. People that are telling you all the things that they don't like. And I really, many churches seem to think this is their responsibility to tell the pastor, to tell the leaders the things they need to fix, the things that they need to make right. Good leadership rather would be turning the attention back to them and saying, "I'm glad you brought that to my attention. Obviously, God is dealing with you about that particular thing, and so I'm going to appoint you the ministry of fixing this problem," and put them to work. It's hard to work and complain at the same time and do a good job at what you're doing. So don't focus on this. Now, it is true, we do need to listen to insiders. They are a part of the group. They're a part of the church. They are members and they're a part of the family. But try to find a balance here, a balance between listening to legitimate complaints, listening to legitimate needs, and just listening to complainers. We also need to balance with, where's the voice of the outsiders? Who's going to speak up for them? Learn when to avoid listening to the insider, to ignore it. Don't make the mistake of listening to excuses that give you an insider mindset. In other words, if it's not working, it's not working. We need to determine why is it not working and what we can do to become more effective. Because if we develop this insider mindset of always complaining about what we don't like, it paralyzes our ability to reach new people. That's a tragic mistake. Don't fall into that trap. Now let me give you a second thing. A second idea is learn to listen to insiders who listen to outsiders. And there are always those that are there. Those that are concerned about someone that's not here. Someone that's always saying, let's pray for this person. They need to know Christ. Learn to listen to insiders who are listening to outsiders. Insiders must recognize the needs of the outsiders are more important than their own. Now that is a big shift in the way that we think. This is a mindset of a champion. You realize if everything goes wrong, if I die today, at least I'm going to heaven and I win. But there are many people there that do not know Christ at all. They don't even understand the basics of what it means to live the Christian life. I need to find a way to communicate the truth with them. See, this is the only way that we're going to reach new people. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And if it was going to happen in the past, it would have already happened. It hasn't. So what can I change? How can I become more effective in communicating? It's the only way that we're going to reach new people. Develop what I'm going to determine here, I'm going to call it an invest and invite policy. An invest and an invite. Here's what I mean by this. When an insider invests in an outsider, something changes in the relationship. In other words, don't just say to someone, come and go with me to church this Sunday. No, that's good, but that's not good enough. That's not the best. Rather say, hey, why don't we go for lunch on Sunday? Join me at church and I'll pay for your lunch. Invest and invite. That's what I'm talking about. Something changes in the relationship. Here's what happens. The heart follows the investment. That's right. The heart follows the investment. Something changes. Something results in a dynamic relationship between the insider and the outsider. Suddenly, they've invited to buy my meal, to buy me lunch, to take me, invite them to a nice restaurant, invite them. By investing in them, they realize how valuable they are to you. And that's what I'm talking about. Invest and invite. See, growing means reaching new people. If we're going to grow, and growth happens in many different ways, it happens not only numerically, it also happens spiritually, it happens in knowledge, what we know. It should happen in every area of our life that we continue to grow, That means we're going to have to reach new people. Jesus said it this way concerning invest and invite. Matthew 6:21, Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There's no way that you can build a good relationship without investing in others, because your heart will follow your investment. I've said many times to young couples that planning, talking about, dating and courtship, I said, when he tells you he loves you, don't you believe it unless the next words are, will you marry me? In other words, if he's not willing to invest in you, that's not true love. True love is not just taking. No, true love is investing in others. This invest and invite strategy, it inspires everyone to listen more attentively when outsiders hear they are visiting our church, what the outsiders are listening to. We need to learn to listen to how does that sound to the person that's on the outside, the person that's not a member of this. And when the members consistently, they're continually new people that are coming, particularly if they're bringing their friends on a consistent basis, then everybody is forced to listen to what's happening through a different filter, through the eyes, through the mind of the outsider. And people always want their friends to have a good impression of their church. They want them to know what a great church this is. So it changes the way that we think. We're beginning to think like champions. We're beginning to think in the way that we're reaching our goal. One of the worst things that we can do when outsiders come into a church, when they visit, is for us to teach the insiders as though the outsiders were not in the room. The truth of it is, that is very rude behavior. Rude behavior. Don't do that. You must always be conscious of how are we communicating with the person that knows nothing or knows very little about Christ. How are we communicating with them and helping them to understand? Now, the third thing I want to talk about in this lesson of the roar of the crowd is listen to organizations that are reaching outsiders. There are certain organizations that had been developed. This is their goal, how to reach the outsider. Here's what they discovered. If we're going to reach the outsiders, to effectively listen to outsiders, we must learn their language. What are they communicating? What are they saying? Now, what's happened for so many churches? They've been insider focused for so long, they have become deaf to what outsiders are saying. Now, that's a tragedy, but that's why they're not communicating. I think it's so tragic because I see so many preachers this way, so many pastors, so many churches, that they stand at a distance and yell at other people. That's not effective communication. That's insider focus. What we've got to do is sit down and communicate. Don't be deaf to them. Learn their language. Learn to listen to them. See, the truth of it is, deaf people speak differently than other people. They have what we call sign language, and they're able to communicate with their hands, with motions, but because they cannot hear, they speak differently. Well, I have learned to appreciate this as I've aged in life, and my hearing is not what it used to be at all. And because of that, it leaves me many times misunderstanding or not even knowing what has been said. It's an awkward situation. Well, this is the same with the insider and the outsider. You're talking two different languages. You're trying to communicate two different ways. And so it becomes our responsibility as the leaders of a church, as spiritual leaders, to find ways to be able to communicate with the outsider and help them know what we are talking about. Otherwise, they may completely misunderstand what is being said. If we're going to be effective, if we're going to develop the mind of a champion, then we're going to have to be able to include the roar of the crowd. The people that attend are going to have to be able to be brought on the same page with us and help us to be able to understand how to communicate with these people that are on the outside. I've discovered you not only have the physical barriers, but we have cultural barriers. Culture is a language of its own. And you have to learn what that language is, how to communicate. Because you're never going to be able to play the game if you don't know the language. You don't know the rules. Oh yes, you're playing your game, but you're not being effective in playing that game. I emphasize it again. If it's not working, it's simply not working. And we've got to find ways how we can communicate it. Jesus did it, and he did it so well. In his day and time, when a very small minority of the people were actively involved in going to the temple, in regular worship, many of them, oh yes, they were Jews, but by culture. They were Jews by race, but they were not practicing their faith. And yet Jesus found ways to effectively communicate so that multitudes were attracted to him. I found that still to be true today, that Jesus is still very attractive. And Jesus points us to a better way. What we've got to do is be able to overcome all of our religious rules and rituals, things that are important to us but have no communication In fact, many times are totally misunderstood by the outsider. We've got to be able to speak their language if we're going to be able to be effective in communicating with them. And so again, I emphasize, we have to change the way we think. Instead of trying to focus on who we want to keep, all the complainers, all the people that are disgruntled, all the people that think, this is my church. Yes, I'm glad that you take ownership. I thank you for that. But do you take responsibility? What are you doing to make it a better church? What are you doing to help us to effectively play the game of life that God has set before us and to be effective in reaching new people with the gospel? That should be our goal in life. And the better that we become at communicating that, the simpler that we are able to make that message and to effectively speak it to them in a way that they can understand, the more effective we are going to be as Christians. Just because we're doing something doesn't mean we should continue doing it. No, we've got to learn how to be better communicators, to get more people involved, to get the roar of the crowd where the people are anticipating the win. This is developing the mind of a champion and thinking like a winner. God is a winner. God wants us to be winners. So God help us to learn how to effectively communicate that to them so they realize how wonderful the Christian life really is. And many of their concepts have been wrong concepts, misunderstandings. We need to communicate it in a language they can understand so they can come and play the game of life with us. God help you, God help me to become more effective in developing the mind of a champion and thinking like a winner.